The last lights of San Diego flickered behind him as the kayak dipped into the swells, its bow rising and falling under the weight of the Pacific. It was still dark, early enough that the coastline looked like a jagged shadow against the sky. Ed Gillet pulled the paddle through the water in slow, deliberate strokes, his body settling into the rhythm he had built through months of training. He had spent the night double-checking his gear, food pack sealed, desalination pump bolted in place, emergency beacon tucked inside the narrow cockpit. When he finally pushed away from shore on June 25th, 1987, there was no escort boat following behind him, no guarantee of rescue, no second chance. His goal was simple and almost unbelievable. Paddle a kayak from California to Hawaii, alone, unsupported, across more than 2,000 miles of open ocean. The first hours felt manageable. The kayak tacked smoothly through the swells, and a light wind nudged him west. But once the shoreline vanished behind the haze, a different feeling settled in. The open Pacific had a way of making even experienced paddlers feel small. Waves rolled beneath him like slow, breathing giants. The heat climbed. The miles stretched into a horizon that never seemed to move. Every stroke reminded him that the ocean didn't care how prepared he was. In the first week, he tried to keep a strict schedule. Paddle until his shoulders burned, then drift while he slept in narrow bursts. He ate sparsely, freeze-dried meals mixed with water he hand-pumped from the sea. His hands blistered, then hardened, but the skin on his lower back and thighs grew raw from constant friction. Salt water soaked everything. Even when he managed to rest, the kayak pitched enough to keep his muscles tense. Still, he covered steady ground, logging each day's progress on his chart with careful pencil marks. Then the weather turned. Around day 10, the waves grew taller and the winds shifted. The ocean stopped feeling like a wide, empty highway and turned into something alive and unpredictable. A storm built fast to the northwest, and the swells rose into long, rolling walls. Gillet tied himself into the cockpit, braced his knees, and rode the waves like a cork. Water slapped the hull hard enough to rattle the bolts he'd tightened before launch. Lightning flashed on the horizon. For hours, he fought to keep the bow pointed into the swells. When dawn finally broke, the storm had forced him miles off course. He tried making up the difference with longer paddling days. He pushed himself until his shoulders ached with a deep, bone-level pain that didn't go away with rest. His desalination pump began to weaken from constant use, forcing him to ration his water. The pump was his lifeline. If it failed completely, dehydration would come fast. He worked on it with numb fingers, tightening fittings and cleaning seals, but the ocean made precision nearly impossible. By the third week, the hallucinations began. It started with shapes, dark outlines in the water that turned into dolphins, then faded into nothing. Flickers of movement on the horizon that looked like distant ships, but vanished when he blinked. His body was exhausted, his skin cracked and peeling from salt exposure, and the constant sun drained him faster than he could replenish. At night, he woke suddenly, convinced he heard voices floating over the water. He'd jerk upright, heart pounding, only to find nothing but the wind pressing against the hull. Still, he paddled. Another storm formed in late July, this one violent enough to flip a less stable boat. Gillet felt the waves lifting him 30 feet into the air before dropping him into troughs so deep they felt like pits. He tightened every strap inside the cockpit and held on, unable to sleep for nearly 2 straight days. A breaking wave ripped one of his antennas clean off. He drifted in darkness, the kayak spinning, his stomach twisting from exhaustion and fear. When the storm passed, he took stock of his supplies and felt a new kind of dread. He was behind schedule, dangerously behind. Nearly all his food was gone. Each morning he cut his rations smaller, taking in only enough to keep from collapsing. His arms thinned. His legs cramped so badly at night he had to massage them until he could move again. His tongue felt thick from dehydration. He counted paddling strokes out loud just to stay conscious. By week 5, he was barely holding on. Sunburn blazed across his shoulders. His fingers cracked open and bled onto the paddle shaft. He drifted off mid-stroke. Sometimes he'd paddle an hour before realizing he'd made no forward progress at all. The Pacific stretched into a blur of blue and white, endless and indifferent. He knew that if he activated his emergency beacon, a rescue plane might eventually find him, but only if he still had the strength to wait. On day 38, he saw something. A faint glow far off on the horizon, too steady to be lightning, too warm to be dawn. For hours, he watched it grow. Then the shape came into focus, the jagged outline of Maui rising from the edge of the sea. The sight hit him like an electric shock. He tried to paddle harder, but the currents near the island were powerful and resisted him like a hand pushing against his chest. The last miles were torture. Each stroke felt like lifting iron. His breathing rasped in his throat. His arms shook violently. Just after sunset on August 12, 1987, Gillet reached Lahaina. His kayak scraped against the sand, and a couple walking the beach looked up in surprise. They hurried toward him when he staggered, his legs giving out almost immediately. He had lost nearly 30 pounds. His skin was torn and inflamed. His voice came out in a whisper. He collapsed on the shoreline, the Pacific calm and shining behind him, unaware of how close it had come to taking his life. Local authorities learned what he had done only after he explained it, breathless and weak. No escort, no support boat, no drops, no backup. 47 days alone at sea in a kayak, battling storms, dehydration, equipment failures, hallucinations, and a body that nearly shut down. Ed Gillet had completed the longest unsupported open-ocean kayak crossing in recorded history. Reporters later asked him why he kept going. He never answered with talk of glory or adventure. He spoke instead about survival, how each morning became a choice to paddle one more mile, how quitting felt more terrifying than continuing, how the ocean stripped him down to nothing but the will to stay alive. He admitted that he thought he might die out there more than once, but he also knew that stopping meant drifting into oblivion. Gillet's crossing became legend not because it was daring, but because it was almost impossible. The Pacific had torn at him for weeks, trying to swallow him whole, and he fought it until the moment he touched land. It was survival in its purest form, one man against a stretch of ocean that showed no mercy, and somehow he lived. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.